So today, we're talking about something that I have found very fascinating to learn about. So I hope that you guys all will too. I will preface that demand generation really challenges a lot of our traditional marketing operations, strategies, tactics. So definitely go into this with somewhat of an open mind because it might kind of push back on some of the things that we're used to doing, some of the ways that we're used to reporting, some of the tactics we're used to implementing for clients. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that this is kind of one framework and one perspective, and there are definitely conversations out there even challenging this or offering different versions of this. So I'm definitely curious to kind of hear all of your thoughts as you hear this framework and how you think it'll apply to your clients. We're going to walk through quite a bit of just kind of an introduction today into demand generation. Some of you may already be somewhat familiar with this. So again, also open to hearing your thoughts and your perspectives on it. But I thought since we're doing like one SME presentation this time around, that this would kind of be the most helpful approach. You could definitely like dive deeper into different facets of this if you wanted to. But I thought just kind of giving an overview would be the most helpful. So we're going to walk through what demand generation is, how it differs from traditional lead generation. They also break it down into two parts. So creating demand and capturing demand. So we'll talk about what each of those means. We'll talk about the media machine, which is another concept that's part of demand generation. The easy mode framework, which is a way to produce content. SEO money keyword strategy, which is what they call the high intent keywords that demand generation focuses on. Their recommendations for your paid ad strategy, how you report in a demand gen world, because it is quite different than reporting in a typical lead generation framework. And then practically, how do you get started with demand gen, since it can be quite a big shift from your traditional efforts. First, let's start with what is demand generation. I also should say that you can stop me at any moment if you have a question or if something is unclear. So feel free to do that as well. So demand generation ultimately is a framework for building trust and credibility. That's really where the focus lies with demand generation. It's very focused on building strong relationships with your customers. It's a relationship-based model where it kind of challenges you to offer genuine value to your customers. And that means providing a frictionless experience where you're providing educational content without putting barriers in place that make it harder for your customers to get that information. It also is all about helping prospective customers find a solution themselves. So it acknowledges that on today's buyer's journey, buyers mostly want to navigate the buyer's journey independently. They're not as reliant on salespeople. They have a lot of tools at their disposal to do their own research and make their own decisions. So demand gen really acknowledges that and empowers customers to take that journey largely on their own without a salesperson involved. The goals of demand generation, one of the biggest ones is building brand affinity so that you're top of mind when your customers are actually ready to buy. So again, when you build a relationship with customers over time, they'll recognize and trust your brand. And then when they are ready to buy, they'll choose your company. It's also about providing your sales team with high value and high intent leads that ultimately leads to a more efficient revenue engine, which we'll also dive a little bit more into later. But basically, like, it's trying to free up your sales team from dealing with low quality leads that are not actually ready to buy. Again, respecting that most people are not ready to buy, and some actions that your customers take might not indicate that they're ready to buy. They might be seeking information and it might not be worthwhile for your sales team to interact with them. It also focuses primarily on generating engagement among your target audiences, which is a little different than lead generation, which is very conversion focused. And we'll get into that comparison on the next slide as well. And it also advocates for dedicating most of your marketing functions to creating demand versus capturing demand, which again, we'll talk about the difference between create and capture demand. But creating demand is more awareness and reach and engagement focused versus capturing demand is what you would consider more of the conversion focus. So it actually challenges us to spend more time creating awareness for our services, brand, and product versus trying to convert customers. So again, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as well. So what is the difference between lead gen and demand gen? This is kind of the biggest question when you are considering demand gen, because obviously the name is very similar to lead gen. I think it kind of got its start as a response to lead generation tactics. So as we kind of discussed, lead gen is more of the conversion focused method. So this is probably the approach that most of us are used to taking. It's a very hot term. A lot of clients come to us with this concern. They want to generate leads. And so often in the lead generation framework, we're pushing for immediate conversions. We're aiming for leads, sometimes regardless of intent. Clients might just have this big MQL goal. They want to get X amount of leads to their sales team, and they might not all be high quality leads. They're just looking to hit a lead number. And a lot of times sales teams can be frustrated because they're handed off a bunch of leads, but the vast majority of them do not actually end up as close won deals. Oftentimes lead generation is not really customer first or value led, right? So that can mean like introducing unnecessary friction in the buying process. An example of that is gated content. If we put an ebook behind a form and we require somebody to disclose their contact information in order to get the resource. And also promotional content, which we'll talk a little bit more about too, but this basically means self-serving content, right? Like when you see a company on their LinkedIn straight up selling their product versus providing like a helpful article in the industry or something that's more value-led. And it's also very focused on the short term. It's looking for provable results right now. Typically, clients come to us with like an urgent lead gen need, or they want to see like a quick turn on leads. So that's kind of the traditional approach that we see and often take with lead gen. And demand generation, on the other hand, is more of a reach focused method. So again, the goal is not conversions. The goal is actually to just engage your ICPs. Something we'll talk about later too is the whole idea here is that engagement does lead to conversions. So you should actually aim to engage because that will ultimately lead to conversions. And this is very customer first and value led. So again, it's focused more on educational content, frictionless experiences, and a brand building approach. So making sure that you're giving customers like resources to inform their journey without requiring them to disclose information or jump through a lot of hoops to do so. And it's focused on the long term. So as you'll see, implementing this can take a while. It's also not like a quick win, quick results type of approach, which we'll get into in the reporting aspect of this. So I think that aspect is what is going to challenge a lot of marketers the most, because you have to let go a little bit of expecting a short-term big result or a clearly attributed result. So we will also get into that. Ultimately, demand generation really makes for a more meaningful handoff between marketing and sales. And I know we talk a lot about like the friction between marketing and sales. I think one of the Evenbound podcasts, you guys just kind of discussed this topic too. But there can be a lot of friction in those relationships. Part of that can be because the marketing team often may give the sales team a lot of leads that don't pan out. And there's this friction with low quality leads. And demand generation does require you to accept that you will be producing less MQLs than traditional lead generation. So it can be difficult for a lot of companies to accept that loss of leads, especially if it's the way that they've been doing things for a long time. But the idea is that by weeding out the low intent leads and focusing on the high intent leads, that it allows your sales team to focus more on those high value accounts. So in turn, they're going to have to do fewer sales activities to convert the MQLs. That means like fewer sales calls to try and convince somebody to become a closed won deal. Less time dissecting lost deals, because theoretically there should be less lost deals. So you have to spend less time evaluating why that happened. More time for outbound efforts. So your sales team has to spend less time managing these MQLs, and therefore they have more time to like make other calls to potential clients or research potential clients. And ultimately just easier management of the sales pipeline, because they're dealing with less leads, more high value, more high intent leads that take less work to actually get into the closed won category. So creating and capturing demand. Again, these are kind of the two categories that they break it out into. So creating demand is kind of the area where 95% of your customers live. So They make the claim that 95% of your customers in your market are not ready to buy yet. On the other hand, they say like 1 to 5% of your customers are ready to buy. So for the 95% of your market that is not ready to buy, they make the claim that because this is the vast majority of your market, you should be expending most of your resources here to generate awareness and education about your product for people who are looking into your product and are not necessarily ready to make a purchase. So again, the focus is on education. In the training that I attended, they call this a value loop strategy, which I found a really interesting and kind of helpful term to think about this. Basically, the idea is that you should be providing consistent value to your ICP all year long. You should be leveraging the channels that they're on, subscriber channels such as like social media followers, email subscribers, so that you can reach them consistently with valuable content. And it should be delivering a universal message. Typically, this is like your main brand messaging that you should be weaving into your content consistently so that your brand is recognizable and relatable and trustworthy over time. Again, this is focusing on building brand affinity, so getting people familiar with your brand. And it should blend effective product marketing with effective brand marketing, which I believe we will get into on the next slide as well. And then capture demand is kind of where lead gen historically focuses. So this is for the 1 to 5% of your customers who are ready to buy a product. This is about attracting and converting your in-market buyers, being present on the channels where they go when they're ready to buy, which we'll talk about a little bit more too, but that could be like review sites. It could be search engines and places like that. Consider whether you're capturing the right demand. Of course, this is something that we all deal with, even in the SEO realm of making sure that you're capturing the right audience. And they do make sure to say that even though they say that this is like a smaller part of your resources, this is still a critical part of the process. So just because they say focus less on this does not mean that it's not as important and that you still should not be dedicating resources to capturing demand, because ultimately, what is the point of creating demand if you don't ultimately capture it? So how do you go about effectively creating demand, especially since that's kind of the focus of the demand generation framework? Again, a big part of this, they say, is blending product marketing with brand marketing. So when you're doing product marketing, this involves communicating your product's unique value, comparing it to competitors, and communicating the impact on their day-to-day life. So what day-to-day challenge or problem is your product solving for the customer? And then brand marketing often includes a universal message that resonates with your audience and sparks an emotional connection. So making sure that your company has that foundational brand work in place so that you can make sure your company has a recognizable, relatable brand that also connects with people on a human-to-human basis. You should also be catering use cases and value to specific personas, which a lot of us already do here, which is good. But you should be speaking directly to specific audiences so that you can ensure that your content is actually valuable to them. And then it also talks about providing a variety of content. Again, a lot of us do a lot of these things, but considering like ROI calculators, product tours, explainers, different formats, different kinds, different channels of content. Social proof is a big focus in demand gen. So showing your happy customers and the results that they achieved. And then repurposing content as part of larger campaigns, because that is one of kind of the biggest challenges of demand gen. As you'll see, it calls for a lot of content a lot of the time. And so a lot of people are concerned about how they can realistically achieve that, especially if they don't have the internal team capacity or the budget to do that. And so it has a big focus on repurposing your content in various ways so that you can achieve that and you can provide value on a consistent basis to your customers. And then on the capture demand side, a lot of it talks about making sure that you actually have capture opportunities on your website. So some of those include like a live chat functionality, exit intent pop-ups, CTA placements. Again, a lot of us do those things. But basically the idea is that when a customer is ready to buy and they're coming to your website, are there actually easy opportunities for them to convert? You should be making that process as easy and as frictionless as possible. It also calls for optimizing your high intent website pages. So are there certain pages that have high conversion rates or high form fill outs where people spend the most time or seem the most qualified? A lot of times for clients, that's a pricing page, a demo page, case studies, testimonial pages, but that could vary on a client by client basis. Utilizing relevant channels. So thinking about where your customers spend time when they're ready to convert, like we talked about a little bit. So are they primarily using Google, Bing? What social media are they on? Is it LinkedIn? Review sites was kind of an interesting thing. So are there opportunities on Google, Yelp, Trustpilot, or even like Reddit where people are leaving reviews? And then considering remarketing campaigns, which we also do quite a bit of, but are there people who have already expressed interest in your brand, service, or product that you could retarget now with new content and information? So we talked a bit about the focus on content for creating and capturing demand. And again, demand generation calls for a lot of content creation and repurposing in order for you to create the demand that you need to create. And they call this the media machine. And so the idea of this is that your marketing department should operate first like a media company, which is kind of a big challenge, especially for clients that maybe are not used to dedicating a lot to content. But the whole idea is offering value-led, entertaining content to your ICPs all year round. It's kind of like a 24/7, 365 approach to content. Basically saying that your customers should expect to receive the same level and quality of content from you that they would from their favorite news source. Again, that's a big ask and that's a big call. So a lot of times like companies have to rely on repurposing content to meet that expectation. So again, we do some of this too. Like Colby has done a great job with the podcast, like making that into shorts for social media. So kind of thinking about how do you structure a campaign that can repurpose the same assets in different ways. They say that to do this, you should also decide on an overarching strategic narrative for your campaign, create several point of views underneath this strategic narrative, associate sparks of conversation from these points of view, and identify subject matters based on these sparks. We're going to dive more into that because they actually have a specific name for this, and it is the easy mode framework. So this is how they recommend that you kind of think about your content strategy approach. And I thought breaking it into a table might be kind of the easiest way to visualize this. But basically, the idea is coming up with a narrative that's relevant to your industry. So the example here is B2B buying behavior has changed. So it's some statement that about the industry that would be relevant to your audiences. And then you break it down into points of view. This is basically the same thing as like a persona or an ICP that your client might have documented. So you would break these out here. And then sparks are basically a statement that this persona would make about this narrative. So for example, a marketing director, in response to the narrative that B2B buying behavior has changed, they might say marketers need to find the right places to create demand. And a subject based on that might be demand generation channels. So this subject could then inform your social media posts or other content that you create. And the same goes for these other personas. So a marketing specialist might be more tactical about it. It might say like, we cannot rely on outdated tactics anymore. And then one of your subjects could be new marketing tactics, and you could dive into that for posts as well. You could have like several frameworks throughout the year. Obviously, you don't have to just stick to just one. So this is kind of an interesting approach. Obviously, there are a lot of different approaches to content strategy. I think that we kind of do this to some extent in different ways, but this is a way that you could really make sure that you are speaking to each of your target points of view or personas, and to make sure that you're really providing them with valuable content. So some of the ways to actually utilize the easy mode framework, one of the things that they really emphasize is utilizing subject matter experts. This is something that we've talked about as well with Evenbound content. A lot of me has been thinking about like the Evenbound content initiatives we've been doing. And really what this does is it adds authority to your content. It offers a unique perspective. If you're actually like and some companies do this, hiring a subject matter expert and like contracting out somebody or working with an influencer or something of that sort. They bring their community with them as well. So you also get that benefit. And oftentimes they know where your ICP hangs out because they're probably already in those places, and they can give you a lot of insight as to where you can find them. It also emphasizes the value of LinkedIn, which a lot of us are familiar with too. And I feel like we use that a lot for our clients. But also look into relevant social channels where your audience spends time. They talk about the importance of really honing in on the specific social channels relevant to your audience and not wasting time just trying to be on every single one. You should really be identifying the one or a couple that your customers spend the most time on and focusing on those. Again, this content should be value-led versus promotional. You should not be simply just selling your product. You should be thinking about information that your customers need. It also emphasizes not being afraid of a long-form post, like not being afraid of kind of writing a lot in your post and kind of giving away the information versus just like linking to something and making people have to click a link and then maybe fill out a form in order to get the information. It really emphasizes like the fact that most people do not want to leave their feed. And so you should be upfront providing the insights in your actual post, which again, like I feel like deviates from a lot of the traditional approaches of linking to an ebook or something like that versus giving the information up front. But the idea is, again, focusing on value-led, genuine content for your audience. It also talks about the importance of bottom of funnel content. So even though we focus primarily on creating demand, capturing demand is still important. So you should still cater some content to this audience segment. They say like everything is on all the time for everyone, meaning like you should be producing valuable content for all stages of your funnel and all ICPs all the time. Again, a big ask, but something that hopefully you can do by repurposing content. And then it also emphasizes that your blog should really be like the searchable hub for your media machine. So they kind of talk about the traditional idea that like the blog can sometimes be the place that content just goes to die. Like you just put it up there and then nobody really looks at it, you forget about it. But it should really be the place that customers feel they can go to like search a term and find a bunch of resources for what they need. So focus on making it easily searchable with tags, categories, a search bar, and other features. I definitely know some of our clients could use this because you have to like scroll forever, like looking for certain topics to find. And if it's hard for us, it's obviously hard for customers as well. So just make sure you're thinking about how searchable the blog actually is on your client's website. SEO money keywords. So this is what in the demand generation framework they call the keywords that are high intent. This kind of reminds me of the SME presentation we had about intent of keywords and figuring out which ones are high intent and actually match your relevant audience. So this is very similar to that. They just kind of call it SEO money keywords. I think they call it money keywords just because the idea is that these are more high intent audiences that are probably more likely to convert and be interested in your product. So they emphasize that when done right, SEO can still have a big impact on the sales pipeline. Obviously, search has evolved, so it's not going to be as big of an impact as in the past. But a lot of today's SEO strategies are focused on high volume keywords that rarely produce new customer acquisitions. They're focused on quantity versus quality of traffic. So it can be appealing if you see a keyword that has like 1,000 searches versus a keyword that has 30 searches. But focusing on SEO money keywords is not an SEO strategy, but a growth strategy. So this is really focusing on high intent keywords and quality traffic. They mentioned this tactic called crash the party SEO, which is what they call optimizing for competitor search terms, analyzing and optimizing existing opportunities, positioning your product as a solution to the problem, and providing conversion outlets on your content pages. So this is not like just about SEO and choosing these keywords. It's about making sure the page experience when somebody gets to that page is also optimized for conversions. So you might be optimizing for a term, but when somebody actually gets to your page, Are they able to easily convert? Are they able to easily see how your product is a solution to their problem? Those are equally important things to make sure you're capitalizing on the right audience that you're able to find with the right keywords. So how do SEO money keywords compare to maybe other keywords that we might traditionally choose? So other keywords are typically just focused on like higher rankings. They're speaking to buyer searches, but maybe not providing a clear solution. They're bringing in traffic numbers, but it maybe reaches the wrong audience. An example of this at my last agency was we had a client who had a blog post on their website that was about how to build out your LinkedIn page, like your personal LinkedIn. But their company was a company that basically like paired private equity investors with advisors to evaluate deals. So it really had nothing to do with creating a personal LinkedIn. But this was like their highest performing blog. It brought in a ton of traffic for them. And so like when we proposed that it was not relevant and it could be deleted from their site, that was hard for them to swallow because like it brought in all this traffic, but it was actually skewing their traffic numbers a little bit because it wasn't really a relevant audience. And the people who clicked on that blog were not clicking elsewhere. They weren't converting. It wasn't actually reaching the audience that they intended to. So make sure that you're not focusing on keywords just for the effect of like, this will reach a lot of people. It should actually be reaching the right people. Again, it prioritizes high search volume. And often because of this, it might not rank highly, especially in today's competitive search environment. Years ago when SEO was first starting up, like sure, you could maybe easily rank for a term that had a high search volume because you might have been the only company optimizing for that term. Today, there are obviously a ton of companies optimizing for a ton of terms, and there's a ton of high quality content out there. So a lot of times if we're trying to rank for a very difficult high volume search term, we're often not going to be successful. So don't just look at high search volume and think that that is an opportunity to rank highly because oftentimes it's not. You may be better off trying to optimize for a keyword with less search volume, but that's a lot easier to rank for. Traditional keywords could get high traffic again, but doesn't give users a chance to convert. So if your website page obviously is not optimized to allow that to be an easy process, then you've kind of lost the point of getting somebody to your website. Whereas SEO money keywords, on the other hand, are really focused on capturing your traffic. So it's helping buyers find solutions to their problems, focusing on high intent keywords that get the audience right, prioritizing that high quality traffic, and remembering that a page's success is more important than rankings. You should be looking at like how long people are spending on your page once they get there, how relevant the page actually is to their query, whether you're offering a solution, and how easy you're making it for them to convert. They also talk about paid ad strategy, which I think historically we would really think about as like a capture demand activity, and it still is. But actually they kind of challenge us to think more about paid ads as a create demand strategy. So even for paid campaigns, demand gen focuses primarily on creating demand within your market, and ads should educate customers about their problem while bringing awareness to your brand, product, or service. They still state that there's a place for like conversion focused paid media campaigns, but they are kind of trying to say like, don't forget that paid media campaigns can also be awareness and reach focused. So the overall goal for these is typically reach versus conversions. They should be laser focused and offer targeted content. So a lot of times for these campaigns, they're recommending getting very niche with it. And like, instead of offering an ebook to several audiences, like how can you tailor that ebook down even further to really meet the niche needs of specific ICPs? They talk about segmenting your campaigns by persona, by company size, seniority, content bucket, ad type, objective. Obviously, there are a ton of ways that you could do this, but they just kind of emphasize the importance of thinking strategically through your campaigns and how you're segmenting them and how you're strategically thinking about them. However, they do include the caveat that you should not overly segment your audiences. They really recommend starting large and adding negatives as optimizations over time. This is because the goal of these types of campaigns is really reach. So you don't want to narrow too much right away and then ultimately narrow your reach, because Their argument here is that there might be job titles or job functions, for example, that are actually interested in your brand and product that you might have discounted at the beginning, but that you should really kind of keep that open at the beginning, see who ends up interacting with your ads or engaging with them, and then add those negatives over time if you find out that those job titles or functions actually are not engaging with your ads. And there's a lot of caveats there. Like they give like the interesting example that sometimes job functions can like actually disclude people that actually are relevant. And I'm sure like Nick and our paid media people know more about this, but they definitely emphasize like start large, add optimizations as you go. And then they also talk about something we do here as well a lot is refreshing your ad creative to avoid fatigue, making sure people do not get tired of seeing the same ads. So they talk about capture demand being only 30% of your paid ads budget, whereas create demand would be about 70% of your paid ads budget. So the capture demand campaigns, they mention remarketing campaigns, demo focus campaigns, and bottle of funnel content campaigns. Whereas these create demand, more reach focused campaigns would focus on content offers, product values, brand awareness, thought leadership, and even videos. The awareness channels that they have found to be most effective are LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Reddit. Reddit is a very interesting one that I personally have not explored a ton, but would be super interested in. And then conversion channels typically are like Google and Bing. They do include the caveat, which I know a lot of paid media people also agree with this. Display ads they have found to be pretty ineffective. So now that we've talked about like all these tactical areas of demand gen, how do you report in this sort of environment? Like what are the metrics that determine success? How do you determine whether this is actually working? This is the part that I think is going to be very difficult for people to accept, especially maybe executives at the leadership level who are used to seeing the same metrics and the same kind of reporting style. So with demand gen, it really emphasizes embracing broader measures of inbound demand. So you can no longer rely on easy to track metrics like the number of leads generated or the cost per lead. You have to leave that behind and accept that there's not a source of truth. So that's very difficult. Like that was one of the things that immediately I was like, oh my gosh, but how do we prove our success? So they mentioned that you should get comfortable that an uptick in inbound demo requests after your efforts is likely a sign of success. So if you've implemented demand generation tactics and you've gone a few months, and in those few months you've seen a lot more like inbound demo requests, that should be a sign of success of your demand generation efforts. Obviously, that's not really how we're used to doing things. We're used to seeing like a specific attribution model tell us exactly where a lead came from. But in this model, you have to embrace this kind of broader approach. They do mention pipeline metrics. So the purpose of demand gen is to really create a more efficient revenue engine. So they do recommend looking at like the number of closed won deals, win rates, average contract value, conversion rates down the funnel. So is your pipeline looking healthier? They say that that should also be a signal that your demand gen efforts are working. Evaluating your revenue, because business performance is what matters, not how you get there. That's their mantra. So you should be looking at overall business performance. And they mentioned too that you can divide your reporting into creating versus capturing demand if you want to see how each of those segments are working. So some metrics for creating demand, how you can measure that. Again, it's engagement focused. So if you're looking to see like how posts or campaigns are engaging customers, these are some of the metrics that you could look at. For capturing demand, again, this is looking at actually converting customers. They mention like, because they kind of say like, do not trust traditional software attribution models, because they have put research out there that they are historically very inaccurate, actually. And I can also share some resources about that if you're interested. So they really emphasize self-reported attribution. So adding a form field on your forms, asking people how they first heard about you, and categorizing attribution based on that, because they've actually done some experiments and comparisons of that, comparing like self-reported attribution to a software's attribution models, and have found that there's a big difference. and that these form fields pick up a lot of dark social areas that like a software attribution platform does not. Again, number of inbound demo requests. They do acknowledge it's not perfect, but that could be kind of a part of the puzzle. Pipeline generated, which they also mentioned can lag behind a few months. Revenue, sales cycle length, that should be decreasing, and lead grading. So that's kind of an overview of the metrics. Again, the idea is that engagement predicts conversions. And so they emphasize really like, do not give up early. The success of your campaign is going to take time. And then how do you actually get started? Obviously, this is like a big shift. So there's no expectation that you should like take this and like run with it. You should probably have like discussions before you just go ahead and say, I'm going to shift my client account to demand generation. You should kind of like look into this, start incrementally, start introducing certain tactics. In the specific training that I went through with Cognizant, which is like a sales software, they kept 70% of their marketing budget in lead gen, and then 30% was for demand gen, and they incrementally shifted that. So you can kind of start by running an experiment and then get sales and marketing on the same page about it, because obviously your sales team will be experiencing less MQLs and they should probably get a heads up about that process and what that will look like.